There is a peculiar arrogance in what we call common sense, not because it is foolish, but because it feels finished. It presents itself as reality's final draft. A floor is solid, a hand touches a table, two objects collide, a body rests on a surface. We move through a world of edges and contacts, boundaries and impacts, and we learn early to trust those notions the way we trust gravity, as the simplest truths available. But the deeper you press into physics, the more you discover that this simplicity is not the foundation of the world. It is a successful compression of it. What we take as obvious is not false, but it is not fundamental. It is not the base layer. It is an emergent interface, a stable story written in the language of survival and scale. Emergence is the art of getting something new without introducing anything supernatural. It is not magic. It is not a trick. It is what happens when many degrees of freedom move together in patterns that become more meaningful than the microscopic details that generate them. A single water molecule does not contain wetness. A single molecule does not have temperature. Yet when countless molecules cooperate through statistical regularities, wetness becomes inevitable and temperature becomes measurable. Not as metaphors, but as operational truths. You can build engines with temperature. You can drown in wetness. The emergent property becomes more than a convenient label. It becomes a constraint on what is possible. Emergent phenomena are not unreal. They are real in the way that laws are real, not as objects you can hold, but as patterns you cannot easily violate. Touch is one of the best places to feel this. The word contact carries a heavy intuition. It suggests that two surfaces meet, that matter reaches matter, that there is a moment where separation ends and union begins. We imagine a crisp boundary where here stops and there starts, and we treat that boundary as an obvious fact. But what is a surface, physically? At the scale where atoms become the relevant units, surfaces dissolve into fuzz. Atoms are not miniature billiard balls with hard shells. They are nuclei surrounded by electron distributions that do not draw clean edges. The surface of a solid is a statistical coastline of electron density, an ever-shifting frontier whose sharpness is an invention of the macroscopic eye. When you place your foot on the floor, nothing like the childhood picture occurs. There is no miniature cliff face of matter that your atoms press against. Instead, you bring one enormous quantum structure into close proximity with another. Electrons bound to the atoms in your skin approach electrons bound to the atoms in the floor. And then the world's refusal begins. The electromagnetic interaction does not allow like charges to pile into the same region without cost. As the electron clouds begin to overlap, the energy of that configuration rises sharply. The system resists, not because it has a moral preference for separation, but because its allowed states are shaped by the electromagnetic field and by the deep constraint that fermions do not share quantum states freely. This is where the strangeness becomes precise. The Pauli exclusion principle is not a force in the ordinary sense. It is not a push delivered by a carrier particle the way we narrate forces in simple models. It is a rule about the structure of quantum states for identical fermions. Yet when you attempt to compress matter, when you attempt to overlap electron wave functions excessively, that rule shows itself as pressure. It becomes what we experience as stiffness. It becomes the upward support of the floor, the normal force that balances your weight. The floor holds you up not because it is a wall of packed substance, but because it is a configuration of quantum possibilities that becomes energetically expensive to violate. Solidity is not a thing. Solidity is a prohibition made tactile. This is why we never touch anything is both right and misleading. It is right if by touch you mean the literal meeting of classical surfaces. It is misleading if it tempts you into thinking touch is therefore an illusion. Touch is real. You feel it, you measure it, you build a civilization on it. The error is not believing in touch. The error is thinking touch is fundamentally what it seems. Touch is not the termination of distance. It is the emergence of an effective boundary, created by the rapid growth of resistance when quantum structures are brought into overlap. You are not meeting the floor. You are negotiating with it through fields, constraints, and the collective behavior of matter. And the negotiation is not polite. The reason you do not slowly seep through the floor, despite the fact that both your body and the floor are mostly empty space by volume, is that the relevant emptiness is not emptiness in the everyday sense. Mostly empty space does not mean mostly nothing. It means that matter's mass is concentrated in nuclei and that the region between nuclei is not filled with classical stuff. But that region is not absent of structure. It contains electron probability amplitudes. It contains electromagnetic fields. It contains the rigidity of a lattice and the energy landscape that defines what configurations are stable. When two solids approach, they do not behave like two clouds of harmless void. They behave like two organized quantum systems whose permissible states collide long before their nuclei ever come close. Your sensation of hardness is the sensation of that collision, translated into nerve impulses. It is the macroscopic experience of microscopic constraints. If you look at it long enough, contact begins to resemble something you would have once reserved for philosophy, a relation, not a substance, a pattern of interaction, not a meeting of edges. The hand on the table is not a fact about two things. It is a fact about the field-mediated relationship between two bound states of matter, a relationship that stabilizes into a boundary at human scale. Friction deepens this point. Common sense imagines friction as roughness and rubbing, as the scraping of surfaces across each other. That is not entirely wrong, but it is thin. Friction is not merely geometry, it is dissipation. It is the conversion of organized motion into disorganized motion. When you slide a block across a table, what you call resistance is often the story of energy being siphoned into the hidden internal degrees of freedom of both materials. Tiny regions of contact form and break. Chemical bonds briefly latch and then snap. Surface asperities interlock and then release. Vibrations propagate through the lattice as phonons, collective excitations that carry energy away from the macroscopic motion. The energy does not vanish. It becomes less available for the one task you were watching. It becomes heat, not because heat is a substance, but because heat is the name we give to energy scattered across many microscopic modes. Here emergence looks almost moral, as though the universe punishes neatness. When there are vastly more ways for a system to be disordered than ordered, energy has more places to go if you let it. That more places is not a metaphor. It is phase space. It is counting. The second law of thermodynamics, the great law of irreversibility, is an emergent law, not present as a commandment in any single particle, but unavoidable in the collective behavior of many. The warmth you feel from friction is a proof that the world's deeper truth is not the crisp motion of one object, but the statistical fate of countless microstates. Even cold is a lesson in this. When you touch a cold metal railing, you feel as though coldness is entering you. What is happening is the opposite. Energy is leaving your skin rapidly, siphoned into the metal's internal structure. The sensation is not a direct perception of temperature as an abstract variable. It is your nervous system reporting the rate at which your body is losing heat. The common sense narrative is again a useful interface, not a fundamental description. The body speaks in stories because stories are fast. Physics speaks in transfers because transfers are true. Quantum field theory stretches the concept of emergence further still, until even objects begin to look like an agreement rather than a given. In the QFT frame, the world is not built from particles as tiny marbles moving through space. It is built from fields, and what we call particles are excitations of those fields, localized packets of energy and momentum that behave like discrete entities under certain conditions. Even the forces we learn to name, like electromagnetism, are not best imagined as invisible hands pushing on objects. They are couplings between fields, interactions that shape the allowed transformations of excitations and bound states. In this view, contact cannot possibly be a primitive notion. It is not a fundamental operation of the universe. It is a macroscopic summary of countless field interactions and constraints. Yet here is the important twist. Even if fields are more fundamental than particles, fields do not automatically give you tables, floors, and hands. The world of daily experience is not simply there at the field level, waiting to be read off. The macroscopic world emerges through a sequence of approximations and stabilizations. Bound states form through quantum electrodynamics and chemistry. Many body systems produce new collective behaviors. Condensed matter generates band structures, rigidity, phonons, and quasi-particles that behave like new things within the material. Decoherence, interaction with the environment, and the averaging over inaccessible micro-details produce the appearance of classical definiteness. The classical world is not a lie, it is a regime. It is what the quantum world looks like when complexity makes superposition practically untrackable, and when the environment continuously entangles with what you are trying to observe. There is a temptation here to turn emergence into a kind of spiritual slogan. Nothing is what it seems. Reality is an illusion. Everything is vibration. That temptation is understandable. The mind wants a clean replacement narrative. But emergence does not replace common sense with mysticism. It replaces naive certainty with layered precision. It teaches you to hold two truths at once without forcing them to compete. At your scale, the floor is solid. At another scale, the floor is a lattice of atoms stabilized by electromagnetic interactions and quantum rules. Both are true. The second does not invalidate the first. It explains it, limits it, and shows you where it breaks. The most profound consequence of this is not technical. It is epistemic. It changes what we mean when we say real. We tend to reserve reality for what is fundamental, as though only the smallest pieces deserve the title. But that definition collapses the moment you remember that your world is not lived at the smallest scale. You do not love at the Planck scale. You do not grieve in terms of Lagrangians. Your mind, your body, your society, your language, your art, your sense of meaning are all emergent phenomena. They are patterns that live above the micro level, supported by it, but not reducible to a single microscopic fact. If you demand that only the fundamental is real, you accidentally declare most of your life to be a mirage. The better move is to treat reality as layered. Real is what reliably constrains and predicts, what persists, what can be interacted with, what carries consequences. Real is not a single floor of the universe. Real is the building. In that building, contact becomes a doorway into a broader view of perception itself. Our senses do not report the world, they render it. They compress. They produce an interface optimized for action. You do not see electromagnetic field lines, you see a table. You do not feel electron wave function overlap. You feel hardness. You do not intuit entropy. You feel friction and fatigue. What emerges in the nervous system is a stable world of objects and surfaces, because a creature that must move, eat, avoid, build, and love needs stable affordances, not microscopic truth. This is not an insult to perception. It is a celebration of its genius. The brain is a translator. It maps unimaginable complexity into manageable experience. It gives you a world with edges because edges are how you navigate. It gives you contact because contact is how you manipulate. It gives you discrete objects because objects are how you plan. And it does so without needing to understand the deep architecture. A child can stack blocks without knowing quantum field theory. A carpenter can build a house without writing a Hamiltonian. Emergence is what makes that possible. The fact that higher-level patterns become autonomous enough to be used without constant reference to lower-level details. Yet once you see this, you cannot unsee the philosophical implication. Common sense is not the ground, it is the map. And maps can be accurate while still being incomplete. The danger is not using a map. The danger is forgetting you are. When you bring QFT into this conversation, you discover that even the seeming solidity of stuff is not a primitive. The excitations we call particles are not tiny pellets of matter. They are stable modes of fields. Stability itself becomes a theme. What exists, what persists, is what is dynamically protected. A proton is stable not because it is ontologically privileged, but because the laws and symmetries that govern it make it extremely difficult to decay. A solid is stable not because it is more real than a gas, but because the interactions within its lattice produce a structure that resists deformation. At every level, the world selects patterns that hold, and those patterns become the furniture of experience. This is why emergence feels like a bridge between physics and philosophy. It offers a language for talking about how a universe governed by abstract equations becomes a world filled with chairs, sunsets, promises, and pain. It also offers a warning. If our everyday perceptions are emergent renderings, then some of what we treat as obvious might be an artifact of our scale, our biology, our cognitive needs. Time's flow, for instance, feels like a fundamental feature of reality. Yet physics, at its deeper layers, treats time with an indifference that unsettles the intuition. Causality feels like the world's spine. Yet quantum processes and the ways correlations behave complicate the naive picture. Even now is a psychological anchor more than a physical invariant. Emergence invites us to suspect that what feels most obvious might be most local, most conditioned, most bound to the regime we inhabit. But again, this suspicion should not turn into nihilism. The point is not to dissolve the world into abstraction until nothing remains. The point is to gain a more honest intimacy with what remains. The floor is solid enough to hold you, and the mechanisms behind that solidity are more astonishing than the story your childhood mind told you. Touch is real enough to comfort another person, and the truth behind touch makes that comfort more, not less, miraculous. You are not less human because your body is mostly empty space. You are more wondrous because emptiness arranged under constraint can produce warmth, intention, and care. So the follow-up to our earlier meditation on emergent reality is not merely an explanation of why we don't fall through the floor. It is an invitation to rethink what sense means. Common sense is not a final authority. It is a successful survival model. It is a set of approximations that become so reliable in our domain that we forget they are approximations. Physics, when it is at its best, does not mock common sense. It contextualizes it. It shows you why the approximations work, where they break, and what deeper patterns they emerge from. And perhaps that is the most useful philosophical posture emergence offers: humility without collapse. You learn to respect the world you experience while remaining open to the fact that it is not the whole story. You learn to treat your perceptions as powerful tools rather than ultimate truths. You learn to live inside a layered reality without demanding that it be single-layered to be meaningful. If you stand in a room and feel the floor beneath you, you can now hold two images at once. One image is the simple one. You are grounded, supported, safe. The other image is the strange one. Two quantum architectures are refusing to occupy the same states. Fields are mediating interactions. Collective behavior is stabilizing a boundary. And your nervous system is translating that boundary into the feeling of solidity. Neither image is the real one and the fake one. They are two scales of the same world, two valid descriptions written for two different purposes. And if you let that settle, contact becomes more than a physical phenomenon. It becomes a metaphor for how we meet reality itself. We do not grasp the base layer directly. We press against it, and what we feel is the resistance of constraints, the shape of patterns, the grammar of what is allowed. We live by emergent boundaries. We build on them. We trust them. We love across them. We call them surfaces, objects, facts. But underneath, reality is not a collection of things. It is a choreography of relationships that become thing-like when they stabilize. It is not less real for being relational. It is more alive. So the next time you touch a table, do not reduce it to a clever line about electrons repelling. Let it be what it is, a daily encounter with the universe's layered architecture, a mundane miracle, a reminder that the world is not made of what it seems, but it is made of something even stranger, something that can support you, resist you, warm you, and hold you up without ever needing to become a solid in the naive sense. Touch is the emergence of a boundary. Solidity is the emergence of a rule. And what you call common sense is the emergence of a world that is legible enough for a finite mind to inhabit. That is not a loss of reality. It is a deeper definition of it.